Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to Tuesdays with the Bible. This is our weekly series where we're going over some things about the Bible to make it easier to understand, easier to use, maybe not quite so scary to approach such a great big book when you see it as a collection of books and a collection of ideas. And so right now we're in the process of talking about the different genres, the nature of different sections of the books of the Bible. Remembering that the word Bible, like the word bibliography, comes from the idea of library. So rather than being a storybook that you just start at one end and then carefully read through to the other, the Bible is intended to be a library, a collection of books with a whole collection of purposes. So we've talked about the books of the Torah, the books of the law, the first five books of the Hebrew Bible, also called the Old Testament. And then we talked about the history books, which are a whole set of things in first the first half of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, um, which would be like Joshua and Judges and First and Second Samuel, First and Second Chronicles, um, First and Second Kings, all of those books that have historical content, books that are lodged in a specific time and tell the stories of specific people who lived in those specific times. And those are read through as selections at different times of year. Today, I'm going to think about what's called the writings. Now, there's several different parts of the writings, and today we're going to look at the ones that are really described as writings. Then we'll look at wisdom literature next week and poetry the week after that. So we have several different genres to think about. It's all in this category that's not the law, not the prophets, it's not history, it's something else. The writings, the books that are typically known as that, are a group of books that are associated with festivals, associated with stories of specific people, stories of specific time and space, stories of specific relationships that are then read during specific times in the Hebrew calendar of the year, which begins, of course, with Rosh Hashanah in the fall and continues around through the course of the year. So we have the books like the Book of Ruth. So Ruth is an interesting one. It's put really up early. It's up near Joshua and Judges, but its timing is a little unknown. It functions in part as a story of the ancestry of David. So it may be that it would be appropriately put a little further ahead um, after some of the others, but it is the story of Ruth, who comes from Midian with her mother-in-law Naomi when their husbands die, and settles and becomes the wife of Boaz and an ancestress of David and of that particular tribe of people. And so that is usually read at the Festival of Weeks, which we've just seen. The Shavuot, that is the associated with planting, with harvest, because Ruth comes to notice by her practice of be gleaning in the fields, of taking the things that are left behind by the harvesters, which was part of the law of the Old Testament for the poor. It was one way that poor were fed. Don't go back and reclean your fields, but leave it for people to glean. Another one of the writings book is Esther, which comes up further right before Job in the Psalms. It is a story from the time of the exile. It is a story about exilic issues. It's an interesting one because it doesn't ever actually mention the name of God. It is really about the people, and it is a story of liberation of the people. So Esther is associated always with Purim, which is a festival that comes in the early part of the calendar year. And Purim is marked by reading what's called the whole Megillah, which is the whole book of Esther. And people are encouraged to act it out and dress up and wave noisemakers and eat little Hamantash and cookies, because it is a story of freedom. It is a story how God's people, the chosen people, were preserved. Esther is taken into the court of the Persian king, and she then pleads the cause of her people who are being unjustly condemned. And in the end, her plea is successful, and the emperor does not kill off all the people, and instead puts an end to the discrimination against them that had been being undertaken. So that's a kind of a fun book. It is one you can just sit down and read through. Another one of the writings is the Song of Solomon, and that is often associated with Passover. Now, the Song of Solomon is an interesting part of the Bible. It's a love story, and it's a pretty graphic love story in some ways. It's got some beautiful poetry in it, but it is not strictly speaking poetry. It is also used at Passover as a love song between God and God's people, as a promises of I will not leave you. And so it has the image of love strong as death. It has the image of not forsaking one another, of delighting in one another. And so it is often read during that time. The book of Lamentations comes after the prophet Jeremiah, and it's called Lamentations of Jeremiah. And this one is absolutely, utterly located in history. It is located right after the destruction of the temple, and it begins with, See, the city is empty. It is a huge poetic lament, and it's included in the writings because it is read during the summer. It's read in that season after Shavuot and before Rosh Hashanah. And it is a communal lament. It's a lament of the people for the things that they had that they threw away, for the things that they thought were strong that turned out to be weak, and a turning back and hoping that they had not lost God along with losing the land and the exile. The exile is one of the two big stories, along with Exodus, of the Old Testament, of the Hebrew Bible. And it is a time when God's people were carried away. The city of Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple was destroyed. And the people are carried away to live in Babylon, near modern day Baghdad, actually, would be where they were taken, and wondering if they will ever find their way back. And it was the beginning of a real diaspora. So it is read often as people begin to remember in the cycle of the year, to remember that not only does God love them, but also God has some requirements for them, and that the law is given to them as a sign of that love. And when that law isn't followed, they can find themselves out of relationship with God. And then finally, there is Ecclesiastes. It is associated with the Feast of the Tabernacle, Sukkot, which is in the fall, and in our community of Farmington Hills, on that holiday, on that period of time, you see all the little booths, the little Sukkots going up, where people will eat outside and really effectively live outside in these little tabernacles, these little huts, these little places that remind them of the transitory life of their people, for a good solid week. And it is always it's always the time when we all watch the weather on behalf of our Jewish friends. But the wisdom of Ecclesiastes, which is also makes it part of the next set of readings, is it's like a collection of sayings almost, and it contains poetry. It contains a lot of other things as well, and it is about how to live and how to live as God's people. There's also a set of books that have some writings, and they are listed as apocrypha. So if you get a really complete Bible, in between the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament, there's a whole collection of books of the Bible that most of us don't necessarily learn about till we're really putting into study. There's Bel and the Dragon, there's Sirach, there's another version of Daniel, there's a lot of other things. These are writings that, for various reasons, were not listed into canonically the Hebrew Bible by the Jewish people, and then later by many Christian traditions. They were included in the Septuagint, which is the translation of the Hebrew into Greek. And in the Septuagint, they were listed, as we often see them now, as apocryphal books, extra books, books with some additional wisdom. They are not liturgical, but they are often used. We have many hymns that are based on that, and certainly things like the Book of Sirach, which is with its proclamation, let us now praise famous men, let us sing the songs of praise. There are many other hymns and songs based on those books, and they're very interesting. These books were used in an exemplary way by Barbara Kingsolver in that really interesting book, The Poisonwood Bible. In the Eastern Church, so in the church, that the Greek-speaking church that then spread and got outshoots in other languages, Russian and Latvian and um, uh, other kinds of churches, but all fall under the rubric of Orthodox, do use some of these books and portions of some of these books in their regular liturgies. And so that is that they are still alive there. And therefore, in any kind of Bible that's going to be scholarly, they are included. They're listed again as apocryphal, as additional, as is not, not fully canonical. Maybe some of them were written too much in other languages than Hebrew and didn't get included that way. And the Christian adaptation and the Christian use of the Hebrew Bible that we call the Old Testament was based on the Septuagint translation. It was based on the book order of the Hebrew Bible. It did not move those things around, and so there's a relationship between, if you would get to pick up a Tanakh, which is the contemporary, full law, prophets, and writings, you would find that the book order is familiar. So that's what I have to say about that. It's kind of interesting to realize that there are just these writings, these things about the history of the people, these things that are taken from back in a very ancient history and brought forward into the way that we live now in their liturgical use. And it is also interesting to realize that stories of harvest and plenty, stories of liberation, stories about love between God and people, laments by people who have lost so much and wonder if they'll ever get it back, and rejoicing in harvest, as in the Feast of the Tabernacles, are all in that rhythmic pattern throughout the whole year that we have as well in the Christian faith, in our religious calendar. So that's it with the Bible. We are right now heading out of, we just had Trinity Sunday, so in the Western tradition that comes from what became the Roman Catholic Church when the Orthodox Church and the Roman Church split. It is preserved down through the times. The Puritans chose to use the Geneva Bible, which had all of these same categories, all of these same divisions. They were not into the extra modern King James at the time. But it is a good reminder for us that the stories of the people of God, the stories about how people lived with God and found themselves confronted with the horror of living without God, changed them and molded them, and how it can change us and mold us. Next week, we will think about wisdom literature. And I did some Wednesdays a year ago on some of the wisdom literature and some of the things found in the book of Proverbs. But we will talk about these sort of semi-poetic but absolutely filled with wisdom books, Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. It's in kind of two categories, as well as a prophetic book of Daniel. And then we will move on to poetry on the 20th. And the poetry of the Bible is, of course, the Psalms, and they get their own category. So meanwhile, I hope that this finding out about the writings will cause you to maybe crack open your Old Testaments, your Hebrew Bibles, and take a look at some of these books in the context in which they were written, instead of just looking at them as like, well, here's a story, I might as well read it, and see if that makes some kind of difference in how you think about it. In the meantime, I hope that you will find many more interesting things, not only to capture your mind, but also to capture your heart as you read about the history of God and people and understand the incredible faithfulness of God and the incredible grace that humanity has received. And so, that's all till next time.